Hey, AP Government. Here's a quick video on Chapter 3 talking about federalism and just the next big chapter that we need to cover, looking at the relationship between the federal government and the state. And I found this cartoon I thought was pretty helpful to kind of understand when we think of the different layers of government. And yes, we have the federal government on top, and we'll talk about some major clauses and the way the government was set up after the Articles that definitely makes us the United States of America. But then you can see some of the other layers of government underneath there. And of course, we have our laws of nature, right? John Locke, inalienable rights, and then that's carried out, and we the people. And then here's our government. So I thought it was a really cool cartoon kind of showing you what we covered so far and how we have basically created a government up until this point, at least the founding fathers did, try to instill some of these principles of federalism and of limited government. So let's talk about federalism a little bit more because I think I covered limited government enough in Chapter 2. So Chapter 3 is all about federalism. Okay. It's just another great cartoon to show you just some of the relationship between federal government and state. And if you can see here, here's Uncle Sam, and here are the states. And this cartoon was written back in the 1940s. So think during the time of like the Great Depression and coming out of World War II. This is at a time when the federal government's going to really start to increase its role over the states. And the states are going to want federal dollars, but they don't want the authority. However, you can't have this, and the federal government is going to really leverage its ability to provide for roads, to provide for assistance to the states, but in return, the states also now have to abide by the rules of the federal government. Case in point here, EC Glass High School. You know, we're under the federal school lunch program, so we have all sorts of federal dollars that are given to EC Glass, and we have all sorts of money coming in to EC Glass High School. But that means we also have to abide by, it used to be, No Child Left Behind. If you take the money, you have to then take the regulations. So many times the states are kind of caught in this imbalance of, yes, I want the money, but the federal overreach is what I'm kind of rejecting, but you can't have one without the other. And now the states have become so dependent, as you can see, the states are kind of poor, it's got the handkerchief kind of hanging out. This is where we kind of lead to a change in relationship that happened within the federal government. So we're going to walk through how that happened with the Great Depression, which obviously led to an incredible amount of economic need, if you will, from the federal government to the states, and then where we are today. A couple terms I want you to know: unitary government. If I was going to say unitary government, think of one word, and that's just the word centralized. Okay, and this just means that basically government is in one place. When we look at like UK's government, it's unitary. It's in London. It's centralized. China is a unitary state as well. It's a very big country, but it's unitary in that there's one policy-making center. Okay. And a confederal government, this is kind of like the Articles of Confederation, right? We had 13 governments, but we didn't really have a national government. So it is completely decentralized. If we were going to have this system, we would basically just go back to where states were almost sovereign. And there was no federal government that could pass laws over the states. However, we have a federal government, okay? And the federal government, the key term I want to use is it is a division of power between the federal and the states. I'll put the federal over the states because it's the supremacy clause. The federal government rules over the states. But there is going to be a sharing of power that exists. And this is why in America, we have 51 institutions of government. We have 50 at the state level, and then we have one at the national level. And we can talk about like how those relationships have changed over time, but the states still have the ability to pass laws. They have the ability to kind of act somewhat independent of the federal government. And it's because of that 10th Amendment that basically we have a credible amount of power at the state level. And again, some of this has changed over time, but we're still under a federal system is what that means. So unitary, it's all kind of top down, and you can see that. You can see federal system is going to be kind of a balance, and the confederal is going to basically make the states like even with each other, and really there is no like central government kind of over the states, okay? All right, so I want to show you a quick picture. I'm going to go through a few notes with you all. I would encourage you all to take down a couple of things that are underlined. I will post these on Classroom to help you out, but you will see these terms again, and it'll be part of your definition. The first big term I want to give you is called dual federalism, okay? And I usually have my students make a cake for this. So if you want to kind of be involved, you can draw a cake. I will try to get a nice cake here going. All right. and it's got like, oh yeah, we got the, okay, good enough. A layer cake is going to look like dual federalism. And a layer cake is when you basically have layers in it, right? So you got like a chocolate layer, a vanilla layer throughout. This is what we could say was very similar to America's at its origins from 1789 to 1932, where the federal and the state government were kind of co-equals. They each had their own kind of like area of power and control, and they kind of balance each other out. And it's dual in the sense of like they're acting together. Okay, there's really no one that's over the other. So again, we're looking at the very beginning of our country all the way up till 1932. And dual federalism is just that they're co-equals. I would usually like get two students that are pretty equal in strength. Sometimes it's two girls, sometimes it's two guys, and they would come up and they would do like an arm wrestling competition. And I wanted you to get that picture in your mind that it's the stalemate. Like no one's going to dominate over the other. You just kind of have this balance that exists. That's like dual federalism, in which the power is really kind of balanced out between the federal and the state government. Okay, it's a narrow interpretation of the Constitution. You're not trying to read too much into the federal government. You're not giving too much power in the federal government over the states. For the most part, like you're letting the states kind of say, okay, listen, the Bill of Rights is for the federal government, not for the states. States, you do your own thing, and the federal government does theirs, okay? And they have an incredible amount of power over public education, race relations. Again, we're talking about the 1930s here, and how much states, could determine Jim Crow laws, right? And those kind of things were going on, education, all of that, and the federal government kind of had a separate kind of set of agenda. Okay, now we go from 1932 to present. The term I want you to know is called cooperative. Okay. Cooperative federalism is where you have this like cake, and I'll kind of draw my cake again. You got to have the sound effects in there, right? Otherwise, you still look silly. Anyway, so here's my nasty looking cake, and it's a marble cake, right? And it's just all kind of mixed in together. You got the chocolate, vanilla, all kind of swirled in together. This is what we look at with federalism since 1932. And this is meant to say that the federal government and the state government, they're not separated in easily defined layers. No, it's all kind of one big mixture. Right? When we think of like education, we think of federal dollars and state dollars and local dollars all kind of working together within education. And this has a lot to do with the money that has been going on from the federal government. So we're looking at like 1933, and this is going to be a much broader interpretation using the necessary and proper clause. This is a clause that came up in chapter 2 videos. This is one of those that's in the Constitution. It's given to Congress to say, Congress, you can do whatever you want to do as long as you pass a law. It's called the elastic clause. It was first really kind of used in McCulloch versus Maryland. If you remember that one, that was a court case in which a federal bank was getting taxed by the state of Maryland. And the bank manager, William McCulloch, was like, I'm not paying that stupid state tax. I'm a federal bank. And it actually went up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is going to determine whether or not can a state tax a federal entity. And they said, no, you can't do that. Supremacy clause puts the federal government over the states. But then they also looked into this thing called the Judiciary Act of 1789. And they were like, can the federal government actually even make a bank? Because in the Constitution, Congress can tax, Congress can declare war, but there's nothing in Article 1 that says Congress can establish a bank or form a bank. And they came back and they're like, well, actually, you can. In the necessary and proper clause, we're going to read into this thing. Well, this really gets activated, if you will, in the 1930s, when the federal government is going to heavily get involved and start reading into all new freedoms, and not freedoms, but all sorts of new powers, if you will, in Congress with Article 1, Section 8. So the federal government is going to intervene in a lot of areas: education, healthcare, civil rights. Federal, state, and local governments are mixed together with the federal government providing the funds. And this is kind of like your test question. Like what is cooperative federalism? It's when it's all kind of mixed in together, but the federal government is involved. We think of court cases like Brown versus Board of Education, right? That's the one that says, okay, schools across the country, not just in Topeka, Kansas, but across the country have to be integrated. You think of the court case Obergefell versus Hodges. That's the court case that's going to basically say same-sex marriage is allowed across the country. No state can deny same-sex marriage. And so this is when the federal government's going to intervene, if you will, and take power away from the states. I like to use keys as an example. Here's a quick object lesson. Okay? If you drive a car, but it's not your car, it's your parents', they can take those back at any time, right? Same kind of thing. States have power, and they get to carry out that power unless the federal government says, actually, we want that back, right? So again, Brown versus Board of Education. States could say, we're going to have segregated schools. Brown versus Board of Education says, no, you can't, right? Gay marriage is not allowed in my state. Obergefell versus Hodges says, actually, you can't do that anymore, states, right? And so now we're kind of in this position where we have other issues that are changing, right? Like legalization of marijuana is one of my favorite ones to talk about, because states right now have that power to determine whether or not they want to legalize marijuana. If Congress was to pass a law saying marijuana is now legal and it's no longer a class 1 drug and all that, and they change all those classifications, this then takes that power away from the states to say, we don't want that, because it's like, well, too bad. It's now a recreational drug, if you will, okay? So as we look at how this has kind of changed, this is the relationship between the federal and state. The federal government has become much more powerful. This is like me arm wrestling a 3-year-old. Cooperative federalism. I would think I'd be able to defeat any 3-year-old out there based on the federal government is stronger and has a lot to do with money and resources, okay? Began with the New Deal in the 1930s, and this is where we currently are. So again, here's just kind of showing you the state of marijuana, if you will, and where you have legalized, medical, decriminalized, medical, decriminalized, fully illegal. And you can look at a few of the lighter states where it's fully illegal, if you will, like you can't have it. But there's a whole lot of states that are moving on this issue on legalization of marijuana. Here's just showing you like a picture. And again, I know it's outdated, but showing you how much the federal government's going to get involved. And like when you look at budgets of states and how it's going to come mostly from the federal government now, in which the federal government has an extraordinary amount of influence over the states, and where that spending is coming from. And we'll talk about some of the reasons behind that. Here's just like grants. A grant is like free money. As you know, you're going through the college process. You would much rather get a grant than a loan, right? So a grant is those dollars that are going to states, are going to people, and you don't have to pay it back. And as we look at, federal grants, well, this is a big deal, because if a third of your budget is coming from the federal government, then they have an incredible amount of power over the things you do. I'll talk about this one more point, and then I'll end this video. Right now, the legal drinking age across the country is 21, right? There might be a state or two like Montana that maybe kind of challenged that a little bit, but right now it's 21. Why don't states lower that to 18? That's because if they were to lower it to age 18, the federal government has said, you can lower it if you want to, but if you do, you lose the federal dollars that help to pay for the highways that are in your state. And in Virginia, that's like $3 billion. That's a lot of money the state would then have to come up with on their own in selling alcohol to 18-year-olds, which, again, maybe 18-year-olds will buy a lot of alcohol, maybe not, but that's a lot of revenue shortfall that you would have. And a lot of states are hesitant then to lower the drinking age because they know they would lose out on that. So just one quick example to show you how the federal government has really gotten involved and through its spending and economic measures to put pressure over the states. Okay, I'm going to stop here with this video today, and we're going to take a look at the next video and look into a couple of things I want you to know about federalism. Stay tuned, guys. We'll see you all shortly. Bye.